So like I said earlier today, we're going to have folk sharing each week in the area that we've had a look at. And in this week we looked at the Evangelistic Missionary, and I've asked Dave to join us just for 20-25 minutes so we can speak about some of that. But Dave, not everybody knows you, so just introduce yourself, a brief personal faith testimony, and just an explanation of how some of your ministry ties in with the idea of an evangelistic missionary.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so brief introduction. My name is Dave Benson. I head up the Traverse Centre here at the college, looking at bridging church and culture. And so that question of how does the church relate to the culture, particularly youth culture, has been a heartbeat for me. Passion all the way through. Very brief background. My dad came from a non-Christian family.
You can talk to them.
I can talk to them. I'm talking to whoever. But my dad came from a non-Christian background, came to faith pretty late in his teens, and had a real questioning kind of mindset. So when he eventually came to faith and I was born, my dad used to pepper me with questions and would play devil's advocate. And like I'd be saying, Dad, you know, what they're teaching in school doesn't seem to align with my faith. And he'd say, well, why would you believe in the Bible? Or things like that. And I'm like, well, you do, don't you? And he'd say, yeah, I do, but why would you? So from a really young age, my dad had decided if my kids are going to have a faith that's meaningful, they're going to have to form it in the context of just where the culture is actually at. So he was a teacher, blue collar, original background, put me through state schools, basically said, throw you out in the middle of it and see what happens. So all the way through school, the majority of my friends were non-Christian. Most of the people I was communicating with thought that Christianity was ridiculous or irrelevant. And so for me, a real turning point was around grade 10 in high school, where I realised that the inter-school Christian fellowship program was rubbish. No one was going to it, and someone said, look, if you're not going to come, you do a better job. And they challenged me to run a week, and I put a week together to do with who was Jesus, a bit of the history, why I believe in him. Put all this effort, went out to all my peers, told them about it, and only 2 different people came along that week to any other week. And we had meaningful conversations, but I was just discouraged and thought, what's going on here? And I really felt at that point, gee, you know, I want to follow a career where I can actually be placed at those bottlenecks in society, where people are going through, but maybe they've got no role models to even seriously consider Christianity. So I went from that into high school teaching, did all my practicums with at-risk youth in some of the rougher schools, trying to understand behaviour management, where are the kids coming from, what's the headspace. Went in admittedly more from an evangelistic perspective into teaching, although I recognise now that's somewhat problematic. I was respectful in the way that I did that, but I set up programs, youth programs through schools, would be involved in a kind of like a youth access centre on the weekends in Charters Towers in an Indigenous community, a mining community, and then started a youth group, and then went from high school teaching into youth work and youth pastoring. Did a 50-50 split in a church job, so I'd actually go in and support the chaplain in a volunteer role from the school's perspective, but paid by the church. And through that, I do a lot of talks in schools and universities about faith, belief formation. Then started with some of the both public and private schools doing talks on why believe what we believe. And then out of that, did a master's in Master of Arts in theology, but Christianity and culture. Pretty much because of the experience that I'd had in the schools of trying to wrestle with the way that a lot of youth writers were speaking about youth culture, saying they're all postmodern, they're not thinking about whatever. And I'm like, actually the talks that I'm doing in these schools and my educational background said that's too simplistic. So I did a 1-year kind of 40,000 word project on how to commend the Bible to the thinking team, how to commend it in a space that opens ears, that arouses interest and establishes trust. And so blended apologetics and evangelism and youth culture in looking at commending the scriptures. And so since that time, I continued to do apologetics, evangelism, and just finished a dissertation a couple of years back on the place of religion and sacred texts in secular education. So I've circled around that space for some time, continue to speak in schools, so that's potted history.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Dave. Obviously, within the midst of developing that and the journey that you've been on, there are always the challenges and the struggles.
Yeah.
What for you were, say, 2 of the, as you look back, what were 2 of the biggest challenges or struggles that you had to try and deal with, address, reflect on?
Yeah, particularly to do with evangelistic missionary, or just in general
in
youth
that
work?
context, that evangelism mission, trying to reach these unchurched kids.
Yeah.
What were the two biggest issues, challenges that you faced?
I think one for me actually was when I went from the high school context, where navigating what it meant to be a teacher and also almost a youth pastor, though unpaid originally in that role, how to navigate both roles. It was very difficult because often in youth ministry you're coming alongside people, but in teaching you seem to have a positional power. And I found that very difficult to navigate. And when I was going into the schools as a volunteer, though as a qualified teacher, that was difficult too. So how to build meaningful relationships of trust and care and conversation and concern whilst keeping appropriate boundaries as a teacher in that role. I found actually the problem I had was not with students, it was actually with fellow teachers, particularly a number of teachers who were atheist in bent and didn't like chaplaincy being in the school. I found that they saw that any involvement of Christians in that space was proselytism, and therefore they were suspicious of us, and I had to deal with probably about 4 separate accusations in terms of my role in the school, thankfully each of which was knocked down, where it was just a hostile environment in that regard. And it wasn't the kids, it was actually the culture and the teachers. I think I also found it difficult then when I went into the pastoring side. I went in not because I wanted to be a youth pastor, I went in because I had a heart for non-Christian kids, and I felt God saying, you've been equipped to equip others. You're here to multiply. And I enjoy the addition focus, which is where you're actually on the front line involved with people, but stepping back to train others. I found that I had this angst within me of, if you guys aren't using this to reach out to others, then I'm wasting my time, which is good and bad. It kept a sharp edge on it, but it meant at times I'd probably be more forceful than I needed to be, because I really wanted to see people actually use this stuff. And then I'd probably have too much intensity when I'd actually get the opportunities to speak with kids, because I was playing both roles and time was at a premium. So therefore I'd probably push harder than I should, rather than just being part of their lives to allow conversations to unfold. But it was helpful in the speaking context, because then I'd have good materials to present. And yeah.
These are the more difficult ones to acknowledge, but everyone who's been in ministry has a blowout. Something you just get wrong. Why don't you share with us one of those blowouts? It's something you look back on and thinking, if I could do that over again.
Look, there's probably dozens of things I could share, but one incident, 2 incidents come to mind. One incident was when I was more in a teaching capacity, and I remember it was, I'd spent a couple of years trying to get to know these kids and care for them. Then I had the grade 12 formal, and pretty much the whole of the year level got drunk, and half of them ended up sleeping with each other. And I just remember the next day, I was just frustrated. I was just sad, frankly. I had, like thinking all these people, maybe they're open to God or whatever, and I just watched them do what Aussie culture does. And I slipped into judgment mode. And I still remember a couple of the kids the next day were all happy about the night they'd had out. I'm sure they had some bad experiences, but by and large they're like, hey, great. And I didn't know how to relate, frankly. I didn't give a cold shoulder. I didn't say anything judgmental, but they could kind of tell that the dynamic was off. And I think that mapped into their understanding of Christianity as judgmental and concerned to moralise, as opposed to actually see them find freedom. So I was disappointed with myself that I didn't love them even in those moments where it really wasn't something that I thought was a good choice for them, whether Christian or otherwise. So I found that hard. One other instance was when I was doing a talk in a public school. I don't know if I call this a blowout, but a friend and I we were going regularly into state schools, and we were doing a range of talks about Christianity through their religious education program. That's still legitimate under law. But I remember the last session that we did in this school, and I knew it was our last session because we've been going in for a while, and they're happy for you to do personal development. They're happy for you to encourage the kids. But as soon as you start making any truth claims that challenge the status quo within the school, you're on borrowed time. And I remember the kids were responding really well, and then all of a sudden this one teacher just asked us something about, what's your Christian perspective on the occult and on seances? And I just thought, where is this coming from? It's from a teacher. And so I answered it as respectfully as I could, but I could tell there was something different in the dynamic that day. Little did I know that 3 of them had gone and complained to the principal, and they were trying to set us up in that session. And they brought the deputy into the session, and they were trying to bait us to say things that were wrong. And I could tell the dynamic was off. And I explained it, but it turns out that teacher was actually Wiccan, and took great offence at that. And the next question was basically, I just think it's so wrong that people would come in here and just present one perspective, a Western perspective that's trying to trump everyone else. And I responded something to the effect of, I totally agree with you, and that's why we're actually coming in here to present something different to what you typically receive in the schools, so that you're not just receiving one perspective. And then it was funny in that same session, someone actually shared about how can you believe in this God stuff, and I actually just threw it back to the group, grade 11 students at Indooroopilly High, and said, I'm just interested, has anyone actually seen anything that goes beyond what you could explain just through natural mechanisms? And some kid who's non-Christian comes up with this story about being on a Christian camp where one of the leaders of this group stepped back on another kid's foot, broke her toe, it was fully out of position, and the camp leaders gathered around, prayed for her toe, and it was fully healed right in front of them. And so this testimony is dropped in the middle of this group, and all these kids are going, like, seriously? And this kid starts crying, retelling the story, and they're not even Christian. So it was like this almost, convergence of kingdom of light and darkness and everything just converging. And it wasn't a safe place, but it was a godly place. But how to navigate that in a culture that's hostile to the gospel is difficult.
Part of the reason I asked that question is because I think one of the most important ways of growing in our ministries is not just to remind ourselves of our so-called success stories, but being very honest about the kind of things that we blew and would do differently at another time and place. Don't be afraid of failure in these areas of ministry. Take each opportunity as another place to learn and to grow. Okay, so that's a little bit of almost the negative. In the role of evangelizing, being missional and everything, few of the real blessings and joys of being involved in this area of ministry.
As I said, I did in 2006 to 2008 a master's in that kind of Christianity and culture space, and part of the reason for doing that was I was reading at the time books about youth culture. Barna and a couple of others had made these broad brush kind of comments about all youth are postmodern. They're just interested in experience. And I don't deny that there's aspects of that, but I knew this was too simple a reading. But we would go into schools like, say, Brisbane Boys College, and rather than telling them what to believe, we'd actually do sessions where we just open up big questions. We did this session, still do, for a number of years, called An Idiot's Guide to Forming Believable Beliefs. So we'd say, all right, you've got an idiot's guide to all kinds of areas of culture, even how to build an ark, an idiot's guide to Microsoft, but what's an idiot's guide to forming beliefs that are worth believing in? And we'd pepper them with questions the whole way through. And we even said, this isn't about you coming to Christianity, this is about you asking good questions. And the nature of the dialogue, to see these kids coming up afterwards saying, that's why I wanted to study philosophy. I'd have all of these kids often who are really hard-edged, because we have Q&A at the end, would come up and then say, so are you saying that we shouldn't teach evolution in schools? And I'm saying, actually no, I want a range of positions to be heard, I want it to be wrestled with. And you'd see these kids from going, you're my enemy, to, yeah, I get what you're saying. And we'd then have correspondence would come out of that. And I had once, 6 years after doing some of these talks, I had a kid come up to me at a bus stop going, I remember you did that talk on such and such, and told me what the talk was about. And that shouldn't be happening from what a lot of the people are saying about youth culture. And I'm like, no, these kids are actually thinking, and that really threw me into looking at brain development and saying, you know what, this is a crucial period. If you don't bring to the fore some of the wrestling and questions and give them space to doubt and to argue, then they'll probably push that into the background, and then they'll just settle on whatever the status quo holds at the time or whatever's most popular. But if you can grab them when they're wrestling, particularly between about probably 11 and say 17, mate, that is a crucial age. The number of people who change their perspectives on the world during that time. And I just think what a privilege to be able to journey with people in that period of life where you can show them what it looks like and you can journey with them and not just tell them what to do. Yeah. Taking them from kids to eventually adults is a privilege. Yeah.
One awesome experience in terms of a positive response. We've spoken a bit about some of the negatives, some of the blowouts, but just one time where it was like, that was just amazing.
Well, this wasn't through a talk. I mean, I don't want to overstress talks and that kind of stuff. I still to this day have contact with a number of people that I've known who still aren't Christian, but have known them through youth work over the years. I just got a message from one of the students I used to teach at Ipswich State High School, just saying, I miss catching up. Can we make a time to catch up? And in subsequent years, she's had self-harm and depression, had 4 kids, and she's got some mental health issues and stuff, and she's now in a lesbian relationship. I mean, it's just, it all hits the fan. But for her to contact and say, I really want to catch up and just talk, and could you be praying for me, and here's what's going on. Well, that's amazing. And, a number of guys that I traced through a few years with, I know that whether they're following Christ or not, that if they're going through a hard time, they'll look me up and just want to catch up and talk. Yeah. And I think that's a privilege. So I've had so many coffee conversations over the years of just listening well, and that's my conviction in evangelism is actually it starts by, we're saying in our evangelism class just last night, but love people with all you've got to the degree they're willing to receive it.
Yeah.
And loving them with all they've got, love them by listening well. Love them by practically helping them, love by caring, love by sharing the gospel. Love them with all you've got to the degree they're willing to receive. If they're not willing to receive something, that's fine, because it's not loving to go past what they're willing to receive. You don't want to coerce people, but offer it and just be consistent and part of their lives. And that's the same with our nieces and stuff. Just stick with them and keep offering it, but keep showing what it actually looks like in practice. Yeah.
One of the things I always enjoy about these sessions, it always aligns quite well with the stuff we've looked at before. So, just good to hear Dave reinforce a couple of the things we've already spoken about. But perhaps, Dave, lastly, before I give folk an opportunity to ask you a few questions if they would like to, imagine talking to one of the folk, either here or who will watch the video, who is saying, this is where I see the Lord taking me. What can they expect in terms of the next 5 to 10 years in the unpacking of this role? Maybe things that are
towards youth ministry or evangelistic stuff.
Evangelistic stuff. Yeah, so in other words, that they've said, look, hey Charles, I've read through this material. I've thought about this evangelistic missionary. I think God might be taking me in that line. What sort of thing could I be expecting in the next 5 to 10 years? Maybe things that are going to change. Maybe things are going to become more of a challenge. Just a little bit of, hey, here's a few little red flags that just be aware that these are some of the things that we're looking at moving ahead.
So that's as much about culture. I mean, that's a tricky one. So a couple of dynamics. One thing is that the number of, even as a lot of people come to faith when they're younger, the number of young people, particularly young adults in most churches, has gone down. So there's an increased pressure on youth workers to be more outreach focused, which is good and bad. It's good that they want to see youth reached. The bad part is that often it's for the sake of we need more people connected in with the church, so it can become more coercive in the approaches, more direct. And my conviction is that just doesn't work with young people. And not only it doesn't work, but that's not the point. The point isn't to try and win them to home base. The point is to go to them bearing the gospel, love them as best as you can, and if they want to align with Christ and come and be connected to your community, praise God. But the point is not getting them to come to your youth group. So I think you've got to be very careful if you're in that outreach side that you're not getting your motives confused and that you're doing it for the sake of getting more people to the youth group. You need to be doing it to love them where they're at and announce the gospel and see what comes. So you need the time to do that. But there's not the same money as there used to be to support people to do that, which means there's going to have to be a larger volunteer base to it. So you're going to have to expect that you may not have a career in the sense of you're going to be paid to do this. A lot of the gigs that we did for many years were for free, and it wasn't until we'd actually shown that we were really value adding that they started to pay us regularly for those things, and now they're quite happy to do that. So we have to do it out of conviction, and that requires character to do that, because if you're looking at it for the money or the prestige or the position, it's not going to be there. You've got to earn your stripes. The other thing I'd say is a conviction of mine is that a lot of the ways that we go about sharing the gospel theologically are pretty light on, sometimes frankly wrong. And I'm also convinced that a lot of the ways we've done that were built for a particular culture that we no longer have. They were built for a culture, for instance, the kind of approach of, if you were to die tonight, if you're going to be, if you're going to go to heaven or not. That kind of approach theologically is problematic, but that maybe worked with people who are nominal or backsliders. But now that you've got atheists, Buddhists, secularists, New Age, the kind of eclectic mix where religion's gone into the background and is more taboo. Frankly, that makes almost no sense to the average person now. So you need to be deeper theologically than ever before, and you need to have your ear to the culture to know not how to be relevant, but to know how they're understanding your words that you're using. So if this is a message we've got, you need to communicate it in a way that that's what they understand when they hear you speak. And that actually requires great cultural understanding. So I'd say one thing is resist very simple analyses of culture today. It's not that simple. There's pockets and mixture of groups. It's not like it's simply postmodern or modern or pre-modern or whatever. It's multiple modernities is how one person put it. There's multiple ways of being modern in this world. And people combine all styles of thinking and identities in the one thing. The major problem we have is that people don't integrate their identities, so they're living out of different identities. I'm this person when I'm at sport. I'm this person when I'm at home. I'm this person in the classroom. This person with this group of friends. How to integrate that? I think Christian mission in this context needs to provide safe spaces where people can actually relate and be loved, be heard. It needs to provoke people with the kind of questions that culture doesn't ask because it doesn't serve consumerist impulses, that we actually need to go deeper. I think we can't offer as good a show as the world offers, so don't build what you do on flash and impressiveness. You actually need to have substance and character and love. Love is the distinctive that we can offer that the world does not offer in the same way. And that just takes time and commitment. The other thing I'd say is don't go it alone. It's very difficult. And there's never been so many accusations against Christians, whether in law, there's a million ways you can either get it wrong or cross a line you didn't even know was there.
Yeah.
So you need to know the context in which you're going and respect the authorities into the places you go. Because if you want to come back more than once, then don't go out there as a lone ranger saying, hey, look, I can say 20 things. You may overstay your welcome. I'm not saying don't subvert in some ways, but what I am saying is respect the people who invited you into a place and consider them the host. And don't go and mess up their house for the sake of a short-term gain. Be respectful in the way you do it. Ask what they're after and actually serve well. Just listen and love is probably the simplest summary of all of that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Dave's last comment, listen and love. But I think the one that I would add, what's come through to me from what Dave is saying, is don't expect it to happen overnight.
No.
The world in which we live has changed, and I think a lot of what we've heard Dave say is that we've got to change because of that. And so, really appreciate that, Dave.
Right.
I'm going to stop the camera and they can ask questions.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
All right.
This is where I can now say the bad stuff? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, now you can be honest.
Okay.